Okay, this is for the con assignment, powers of the imaginary unit. Recall that the imaginary number I equals the square root of -1, okay? So if we had an exponent for I without changing anything, that would just be I to the first, okay? So I to the first equals the square root of -1, which is just I. I squared is going to be the square root of -1 times the square root of -1, right? Because that's just I times I. So when you multiply the same number under the square root times itself, you just remove the square root. So that's just -1, okay? And if you do I to the third, that is the same as I times I squared, okay? And I is just I, and I squared we said was -1. So -1 times I is just -I, okay? Just remember, as a side note, when you have the same base, you add exponents. So if you have x to the n times x to the m, you just add those exponents. So that would be x to the n plus m, okay? So for example, if you have x squared times x to the third, you just add the 3 plus 2, and that's x to the fifth. Okay? So that's what I did here. I is the same as I to the first times, I to the third is the same as I to the first times I squared. Okay, because 1 plus 2 is 3. Now we have I to the fourth is the same as I squared times I squared, because 2 plus 2 is 4. But we said that I squared is -1. So that's going to be -1 times -1, which is just 1. Okay? So I to the first is just I. I squared is -1. I to the third is -I. And I to the fourth is 1. Now watch, the pattern will just keep repeating. I to the fifth is the same as I times I to the fourth, right? Because the exponent on I is just 1, and 4 plus 1 is 5. So I is just I, and we said I to the fourth is just 1. So I times 1 is just I. I to the sixth is the same as I squared times I to the fourth, because 4 plus 2 is 6. But we said I squared is -1. And we said I to the fourth is +1. And that's just -1. All right, let's just finish the pattern here. I to the seventh is the same as I to the third times I to the fourth, because 3 plus 4 is 7. Okay, but we said I to the third is -I. And we said I to the fourth is +1. So -I times 1 is just -I. And finally, I to the eighth is the same as I to the fourth times I to the fourth, because 4 plus 4 is 8. But we said I to the fourth is 1. So this is just 1 times 1, which equals 1. Okay, notice the pattern repeated. We have I, -1, -I, +1. Okay, it's going to repeat. Every 4 exponents, it's going to repeat. Okay, so the way to solve for I, I'll just do the example right here. It's probably, I'll do the example right here on the side. The way to solve for I is just to, oh my goodness, pens, color, red. Okay, the way to solve for I is just to divide the exponent by 4 and find the remainder. Okay, let's do an example. What is I to the 17th? Well, here's what you do. You divide 17 by 4. So 4 into 17, okay, 5th grade math. 4 times 4 is 16, and that's a 1, okay? So the answer is 4, remainder 1, okay? So the new exponent on I is going to be 1. Whatever the remainder is, that's your new exponent on I. So I to the 17th is what we started with. I to the 17th is the same as I to the first power. And we said I to the first power is just I. So that's your answer. So for all of these, you take the exponent and you divide by 4. Let's do another one. Let's say we do I to the 34. We'll take the exponent, which is 34, and divide it by 4. 4 into 34, okay, 5th grade math. Put an 8. 8 times 4 is 32. 34 minus 32 is 2. So we have 8, remainder 2. Okay, that 2 is the new exponent. The remainder is the new exponent. That's I to the second, I squared. So I to the 34 is what we started with. That's the same as I squared. And we said I squared is -1. So that's it. It's pretty easy. All right. Let's try I to the 51. Okay. So 4 into 51. Let's see, 12 would make it 48. Let's start with 1. 1 times 4 is 4. Okay, 5 minus 4 is 1. Bring down the 1. 4 into 11 is just 2. 2 times 4 is 8. 11 minus 8 is 3. And we have 12, remainder 3. So the 3 is your new exponent. Whatever the remainder is, that's your new exponent. You're always dividing by 4. So it's going to be I to the third. The original, I to the 51, is the same as I to the third. But we said I to the third is what? -I. So that's it. All right, just keep dividing by 4. And whatever the remainder is, that's your new exponent. And then just look on this chart, and that's it. That's your answer. Okay? It works for negatives as well. I don't think there's any negatives in this assignment, but I'll show you a trick real fast. Just as an example. If, I don't think they'll give you this, but if they give you, let's say, I to the negative 3, that's the same as 1 over I to the third. Okay, so if you have a negative exponent, just move the number in the denominator and change the plus minus sign on the exponent. Okay, and we said 1 over I to the third. Well, we said I to the third is negative I. So this would just be 1 over negative I. Okay. Again, I don't think they're going to give you negative exponents, but just in case, let's say they give you I to the negative 5. Okay. That's going to be the same as 1 over I to the 5th. All right, if you have a negative exponent, just move it to the denominator and change the plus minus sign. And we said I to the 5th was just I. So this would just be 1 over I. Okay, just wanted to show you that trick. I don't think you need it for this one. All right, but that is it for this assignment. Just like I said, take the exponent, divide it by 4, and whatever the remainder is your new exponent. And then use the chart for the first 4. And that's it.